Hi, everyone. Welcome. It is just 1 o'clock. I'm going to give people about 30 more seconds to join in, and we'll get going. I'm glad you could join us today. All right, we'll start. Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Harry Klein. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Appsembler, and I can't thank you enough for joining us for what should be a really informative 60-minute session, really focused on why you need an education team and how to build that. Nate Awney, the Appsembler CEO and founder, will briefly take a look at sort of the history of Redis University and how we met Redis and how we helped them develop this. Our special guest is Kyle Banker. He's Redis's Senior Director of Education, and he's going to share the story of the Redis education team and the type of measurable impact they're having. So a couple of brief housekeeping things and we'll dive right in. Your audio is muted. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom control bar. Conversely, if you've got a user experience, a technical question, anything like that, please feel free to just chat to me directly. All right. As I mentioned, we've got two great speakers for you. Here's Kyle and Nate. As I mentioned, Nate's an entrepreneur, a programmer, and developer at heart. He's our CEO and founder and helps drive our mission to empower trainers and educators to deliver engaging hands-on learning experiences. So you all can really focus on what truly matters, which is your learners. And we pretty much let you deliver these really easy to deliver hands-on immersive training experiences to your customers, your employees, your users, some of the logos, some of the companies we're working with. And Redis is the home of Redis, the world's Redis Labs home of Redis, the most popular in-memory database and the commercial provider of Redis Enterprise. And you'll be learning a little bit more about that. All right, Nate, take it away. Nate, you're muted.
Okay, thanks, Harry. I wanted to provide a brief history of how Appsembler came to be a part of the Redis University journey. And it all started with this guy, Alvin Richards, who is the Chief Education Officer at the time. And Alvin came to me at the end of February 2018, and he said, Nate, I have this vision for the Redis University. We want to offer high quality education to anyone. And by the way, we also want to provide hands-on labs to every learner. Can you do that? And we said, yes, let's make it happen. And in record time, about 2 months later, we launched the Redis University site at RedisConf. And at the next year's conference, Alvin said, okay, we want to provide every learner who comes to our training day to get a virtual lab where they can do all the exercises. We don't want them to have to download and install anything on their local computer because that causes all sorts of problems for the instructors and the students. Can you do that? And I said, yes, let's make it happen. So 400 developers gathered on the pier in San Francisco to learn and develop their skills. And there were 4 training sessions held simultaneously throughout the entire day. And at the end of the day, we had spun up over 600 lab environments. And this meant that the attendees could truly learn by doing without all the hassle that's usually associated with setting up laptops with all the software that they need. So you're probably wondering, well, what about RedisConf 2020? Did it happen? You guessed it, the entire conference was held online, but because Redis Labs had already been delivering web-based labs the previous year, they had experience doing it and were still able to deliver these immersive hands-on experiences to learners, but in a virtual conference format. So you're probably wondering, how did Redis Labs put together such an amazing event with so many learning opportunities for the attendees? Well, the reality is that under today's pandemic situation, the opportunities to reach a technical audience with live educational events are limited, if not non-existent. And the question that we're hearing from a lot of software companies these days is, how do you continue to educate your audience when you can't gather in person? And how do you do it in a scalable way, in a durable way? And the bubble suits at this Flaming Lips concert are not the answer, although they do look very fun. Well, Redis Labs has figured out how to do it 24/7. Anyone can go to university.redislabs.com site and enroll in high quality courses with hands-on labs completely free of charge. You don't even have to pay for admission to their conference. But why would a software company give away courses? I think it's pretty clear how it benefits learners, but how does it benefit the company? It sounds like a lot of effort. Is it worth it? Well, let's just say that it is worth it, and hopefully our guest speaker today will convince you of that. How do you actually go about building an education team and demonstrating the ROI? And here to tell you about it is Kyle Banker. Kyle, take it away.
All right, thank you, Nate. Let me just share my screen here. I think you have to unshare.
Yep. Unshare. There we go.
Okay, and here we go. Great, can everyone see my screen?
You're good.
All right. Okay, so yeah, so just want to start by thanking Nate and Harry for putting this webinar on and allowing me to share some knowledge with y'all, and thanks to everybody who's participating. My talk is called Why Your Software Company Needs an Education Team and How to Build One. And this is a pretty general title, I would say, and it allows me to talk about a lot of different things. But I hope that you can take something away from what we've learned. I don't claim to be the world's foremost expert on education teams or education teams at software companies even, but I will share some of the things I've learned over the past couple of years of more or less running this at Redis Labs. So what are we going to talk about? I want to start by talking about what education is and what the educators are, the what and why of this whole thing. I want to talk about education at Redis Labs. So some of the reporting structure, the responsibilities that we have, and how we tie into some of the other departments. I'm going to talk about Redis University, which is our online free course offering, powered by edX and Appsembler. I want to talk about metrics, key performance indicators, and ROI. So how do we actually measure and then demonstrate value back to the business? And finally, I'll end with a few helpful tips. So please stick around to the end. I think some of these tips are actually really important, but hopefully you get tips throughout the presentation. Really quickly about me, my name is Kyle Banker. I'm a Coloradoan, I'm a pianist, I'm a software engineer obsessed with communication. I'm a lifelong programmer type, so I didn't study computer science in college, studied philosophy and English. I did some graduate work in education, but I started programming when I was young. I taught high school for 4 years. I was an early employee at MongoDB. I wrote one of the first books on MongoDB called MongoDB in Action back in 2011. I spent a number of years as a data engineer and then a data engineering team lead, building out real-time data pipelines. And for the past couple of years, I've been kind of going back to a more educational role. So I run education at Redis Labs. What is Redis? What is Redis Labs? Redis is an open source BSD licensed in-memory database. It's the most popular database for developers, according to Stack Overflow. Redis Labs is the sponsor of open source Redis. So we sponsor all of the development of open source Redis. And we provide an enterprise version of Redis called Redis Enterprise in both the cloud and on-premise package. We also develop what are called the Redis modules, Redis Search and Redis Graph being two of the really important ones. So that's Redis Labs. Okay, let's get into education and educators. So it's really important when we talk about what an education team is. Let's just take a step back and ask, what is education? Education, it's pretty simple when you look at it. It's the art and science of teaching. So in the technology business, what education means is a few things, the way I see it. One is enabling our employees. Number two is training our customers. And number three is empowering our users. When I talk about the education department at Redis Labs, I'm mostly talking about number three here, but I'll talk about how it relates to numbers 1 and 2 as well. So when we talk about empowering our users, there are a couple of components that are important. There's the practical, which is the education teaches developers how to use our technology. It's pretty plain and simple, right? We want people to know how to use our technology to solve whatever problems they might have. There's also a psychological side to it, and this is really important about education. You know, we go to school from a young age. We trust our teachers, we trust our schools, I think. So education has this sincerity and this trustworthiness, and I think it's a really important component to the reason why we do education. If you look at it from the perspective of business sense, Redis is an open source project, and that means that anybody can use it and run it on their own. So, you know, if we look at it from a purely strategic perspective, we want to continue to grow the software community of users, the OSS Redis community. We want them to develop more and more applications, and ultimately we can monetize some percentage of that and build our customers and our enterprise use cases. To go back to the idea of sincerity, you know, somebody a couple of years ago, Andrew Erlichson, who started MongoDB's education program back in 2012, he said, education is the most sincere form of marketing, which I found really resonated with me. It makes a lot of sense. Education is this free gift that we give. We give it freely. We don't necessarily expect anything in advance. Seth Godin has talked a lot about these types of things, and I'll let you read the quote yourself if you want to come back to it. But I often think of this and repeat this to other people, and it often immediately clicks. And maybe this is a good way to communicate this to other people in your organization or even management when you're trying to justify education. It's the most sincere form of marketing. There's this kind of sort of trajectory of trust with each of the departments of an organization when it comes to developers. Specifically, if we looked at software developers, where sales is kind of the least trustworthy to them and engineering is the most trustworthy, right? Sales, you know, and this is an oversimplification, I know, but sales, you know, my thought is, when can you sign this deal? Marketing is, hey, our product is the best, right? On the other hand, engineering is, I just got a 3% reduction in CPU by cutting a compressed radix tree, which is great. But the real thing with education is like, look, we can help you grow professionally by teaching you some new skills. And we're not asking for anything really in return. But the crux of this whole thing is that teaching is actually a skill, right? So that's why we have an education team. What people on the education team have are a somewhat rare combination of skills, actually, which is subject matter expertise, presentation, communication, and writing abilities, the ability to plan lessons and evaluate students. One of the things that's really interesting that you might not think at first is that not everybody can write a multiple choice question. We've taken subject matter experts and had them, you know, help us work with some of our classes, and when they try to write multiple choice questions, you look at them and you're like, wait, this doesn't make sense. This is too long-winded. I don't understand what you're asking here. Writing a multiple choice question is one example of a skill that it can be learned, but that does have to be learned to be successful in something like educating a person. And that goes for evaluating students in general. Of course, finally, there's also creativity and passion, right? I want educators who are passionate, who are excited about what they're teaching, and who can inject some creativity and humor and whatever they personally bring to the enterprise. I want people who maybe ideally, or at least, you know, the head of the group has some background in educational theory. And when I talk about educational theory, there are a few things that I think are important. One of them is being able to define learning objectives and knowing what we're teaching and why we're teaching it. One of them is having some background in evaluating students and thinking about, you know, different levels of understanding. So Bloom's taxonomy, if you haven't heard of it, is easy to go look up and read up about, and it can inform the way you teach your students, right? Are we just teaching somebody to remember facts, or do we want them to be able to evaluate a particular situation? There's a really important concept of top-down versus bottom-up learning, or top-down versus bottom-up presentation. And I find that people who don't have any background in education and haven't thought about this before, they aren't conscious of which one of those two things they're doing. Where top-down is really giving people the big picture up front and showing them how all the components, and bottom-up is saying, no, we have to dive into each one of these little bits of minutia before I can show you the big picture. And the reality is that you have to do a little bit of both, but you have to be conscious of when you're doing which one of these and why. And of course, there also, as I just talked about, the idea of evaluating student learning. So the person who is a subject matter, who has all of these skills, is a bit of a unicorn, at least in my experience, if we're talking about, you know, the world of software and software engineering and developers and technology companies. But I'll give an example of somebody who I hired about a year ago. And it was interesting because he had been an engineer for 10 plus years, very successful software engineer. He worked for IBM Compose on databases as a service, but he also did some things on the side that that made us think this person might have the right skills. He wrote a blog, right? And he published his own book called The Temple of Django Database Performance. And you can see in here that there's subject matter expertise, there's writing skills, there's creativity and passion. So if we have some subset of those skills that we think educators want to have, those are the kind of people we want to find. And it can take a little bit of cajoling because these people, maybe they're used to just being in the software engineering role, and that's been safe for them. And of course, education is a little bit niche. But I can tell you that when you find somebody like this, and they clearly have a bit of an interest, they can be really happy when you bring them over, and they can exercise this whole other side of their personality. So those are some thoughts on education and educators. Let's talk about education at Redis Labs. So what are we responsible for? My education team is responsible for these three things. One of them is online learning. So that's free online courses at Redis University. We also do video explainers. So in addition to the videos that comprise the courses, we also have a YouTube channel that has shorter form video content. We're also responsible for certification. Developer certification is a thing that a lot of tech companies provide. A lot of developers out there like it. A lot of employers like this when they can sort of quantify a developer's ability. I will say that there are two types of developers, or two types of enterprises when it comes to certification. Some people highly value it, and some people don't value it at all. But we view it as a necessity if you're a serious enterprise software company. Number two is developer advocacy. So that's actually people going out into the community and meeting developers where they are. Developer advocates have a lot in common with what I would consider an educator, because they're subject matter experts, but they actually know how to teach and communicate as well. They know how to teach people how to solve problems with our products. So there's a lot of overlap between what I would consider a curriculum engineer who's solely dedicated to online learning, and a developer advocate who's a bit more quote unquote in person, despite COVID. These make sense. It makes sense to have these fall under one umbrella so that we're aligned in the way we're teaching. Similar to documentation. Now, documentation may seem like, wait, that's kind of out of left field, isn't it? But documentation also we view as a way to give credibility to the community, obviously, right? But to really teach people how to use our products. And again, there's I hate to use this word, there's a synergy, or there's a relationship, right, between all of these things. Documentation is telling the same story that our online learning is telling. That's really powerful. What are some things that education might, let's see what happened here. Oh yeah, what might education also include? So there are other things that you can imagine education including, right? One of them is community. So when we talk about community, I'm talking about champion programs, user advisory boards, user-led events. And the reason that community relates goes back to that trustworthiness and credibility perspective, which is that we have developer advocates or educators who are trustworthy because they're subject matter experts and because they're out there to try to educate, right? If those people are also leading the community, we want the best people to come to us, right? So if we have our most credible people out in the community leading our community programs, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's not something we're doing right now, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Customer training, obviously, this is huge, right? This is only for paying customers. It's tailored to the customer. I'm going to elaborate on that in just a second. Also, employee enablement. So this is really what I would call internal training, or really training our employees to do their jobs as well as possible. So a common question would be, why doesn't education also include enablement or customer training? Well, I'm going to answer that question in a second, but let me first say, what the difference is between these, the way I see it. So if we talk about audience, education is for our developers, our end users. Enablement is for our internal employees. Customer training is for paying customers. The cost for education is free. The cost for enablement is totally internal. The cost for customer training is paid. The focus on education is awareness, adoption, and lead generation. Focus on enablement is competency. The focus on training is customer success and sales, actually. The delivery for education is online. The delivery for enablement is kind of a combination of online plus one-on-one coaching. And the delivery for customer training is live instruction. Even in the time of COVID, all of our customer training happens with a real trainer who is at the very least on a Zoom call. Tailoring, we tailor education to a very broad audience, right? We want to enable developers across the board. Obviously, if something is totally online, it has to be broad by definition. Enablement is very role specific within the company. There's sales enablement, there's technical enablement. So that requires different specializations that the education team might not have. Customer training can be very customer specific. So it requires an understanding of the customer. It requires tailoring it to the customer's specific deployment, which means maybe changing the course in one way or another as we deliver it. And finally, if we talk about the team, we talk about education as the education team. Enablement, there's technical enablement, there's sales enablement, which I didn't include there. Customer training is really owned by sales because that's where the relationship is, and it's delivered by our professional services team. So this kind of interesting question, could there be like a global education group that covers all these things? Yeah, theoretically there could, but it's hard. It really depends on the company, its products, the difference, in our case, we have open source versus enterprise. Maybe if you're just an enterprise company, it would be easier. Maybe if you're a smaller company, it would be easier. So there are interesting questions there. There should be connections between those groups. Whether they should fall under the same umbrella is an open question, but they don't at Redis Labs. Another really interesting question that I think is worth asking is, how is education different from marketing? And I'm going to give you just a few reasons, and some of these are a little general, but the audience, again, for education is our developers, our end users. We talked earlier about the trust question. Developers generally don't trust marketing, but they do trust an educator, right? If we look at marketing, marketing is more geared towards decision makers and the quote unquote market and the analysts and even our customers. If we look at expertise required, education consists of what I think of as educators and subject matter experts. Marketing consists more of people who specialize in marketing, right? Which is a slightly different specialization. Of course, there is technical marketing. That's true. Anyway, be that as it may, lead generation. We have a relatively minor role in lead generation. For marketing, it's a major responsibility. Customer case studies are not owned by education. They're a major responsibility of marketing. Branding and corporate marketing are not owned by education. Marketing owns that. Marketing owns product releases. Marketing owns competitive analyses. So just a few differences, but I think some pretty key differences between what you would think of as education and what you might think of as marketing. All right, let's talk about Redis University and what we do here. So as I mentioned earlier, Redis University is one prong of the education team's responsibility, but it's definitely a big one. This is our landing page, Learn Redis at Redis University, free online courses taught by Redis experts. So this is what's hosted using edX and Appsembler. We also here host Redis certification, and we use edX in a combination with ProctorU for proctoring to deliver our certification exams, to administer and deliver our certification exams. We have 7 courses published to date. So we have an intro course. We have 3 different language-based courses, Java, JavaScript, and Python. We have a course on one of our modules called Redis Search. We have a more advanced course on one of the more advanced data structures called Redis Streams. And we have a course on Redis security. And to give you kind of a sense of the anatomy of a course, this is Redis for Python developers. This is a course we released just a couple of months ago. So this course consists of 33 videos. Each of the videos is 3 to 8 minutes in length. We have 6 text-based readings. We have a sample application that's built in Python, and that can be run as a container as part of a virtual lab or just Docker running locally. So we kind of provide our students with both options. We have a number of programming challenges, and we evaluate our students with multiple choice questions for the homework and the final exam. To give you a timeline and kind of a sense of the amount of time it takes, Redis University kind of launched in April 2018. I think the first course, it's a little bit after that, maybe the summer of 2018 was the RU101 course. That December, we launched our second course with the help of another subject matter expert. That spring, we launched a 3rd course with the help of another subject matter expert. Later that year, we launched the Java course, which I wrote. Once we had the Java course, we kind of had a template for language courses. So we were able to relatively quickly launch the JavaScript course. And then and then COVID happened, and we shifted our focus for a period of time, but came back with 2 courses just a couple of months ago, the Python course and the security course. Developing courses takes time, right? There's a whole cycle. It's a production process. Starts with learning objectives. What do students need to know by the end of the course? How do we evaluate our students? We need to, that's the first question you ask, right? When you're developing a course, you need to start with, what are students going to get out of this course? What do we actually want them to be able to do or to know by the end of the course? The next thing you develop are your examples and your exemplars, right? What are the examples that we're going to use to teach this content? This is the fastest way to get through this. Once you have your examples and your exemplars, you can start outlining and you can start writing your scripts. For all of our videos, we actually write a script. These aren't done ad hoc. We write a script because for a couple of reasons. It's much easier to deliver on camera. Number one, it's much easier to edit. It's easier to communicate with our video team. It's easier for people who might be English as a second language because it's clearly written. We can clearly transcribe it relatively easily. So there's scripts and texts. Finally, after scripts and text, there's video production, which is a whole art unto itself. And I can talk about that a little bit here, but it's a huge process on its own. But the thing that's really important is having review at all stages, right? Reviewing the learning objectives, reviewing examples, and I'll talk about this again. But review is a key component of what our educators are doing all the time. We're continuously refining throughout the process. Video production. I do want to mention a few things about video production and kind of how things have evolved over time. We have 2 video producers on the team. Now, one thing about that, if you're going to build an education team, it's good to have some video help. Maybe you want to contract it out, but if you want to hire in-house like we did, you hire one person, which is what we did to start. The original Redis University team was this guy right here, Alvin, and one video producer. And basically they worked together for a few months and built this thing. You can see that the production value is maybe not quite as refined as what you see on the right and down here on the left. At the beginning, it was just a green screen and and some basic styles, and that's actually enough to get things started. We've experimented with other techniques and then just other creative ideas since then. You can see kind of down here on the lower left a motion graphic describing a security concept. You can see on the lower right we're actually using some real life figurines and a different type of a real backdrop as opposed to a green screen backdrop, which gives kind of a more real feeling texture. And in the upper right hand corner, the guy in the blue shirt here with the beard, this is actually Justin filming from home. So and you can see that the background is this more kind of a set almost. And what's cool is that he's had the ability to create a set and build his own studio. And Justin actually does a lot of videos for us. He's done a really great job. He's an educator, but he's really gotten into kind of the set creation and lighting side of this whole thing. So I can talk about that more too if you have questions about it. But there's a lot of room for creativity here, and things will evolve. The other thing I'll say that's not mentioned here is that videos take a lot of time to produce. You'll go through many different iterations of a video before you're like, okay, this is finally ready to go. We use a piece of collaboration software called frame.io. So whenever we're working on a video, the video, once it's kind of ready to be reviewed, we'll go on frame.io and we'll leave 1 million comments, and then the next version will come up and we'll leave fewer comments, but still more. And usually we'll go through several iterations before a video is ever complete. But of course, the thing to remember is that a video starts with an idea. It starts with the learning objectives. It starts with what we're actually going to teach. It starts with an outline and then a script. And so there's a whole kind of interesting progression that goes into making a video. You don't just sit down and make a video. All right, let's talk about metrics, KPIs, and ROI. So edX, fortunately, has a connector to Segment. So a lot of metrics and events are exported via edX into Segment. If you don't know about Segment, it's a data integration tool. Segment then feeds into 2 downstream systems for us. One of them is Amazon Redshift, which is a data warehouse, and the other is Marketo, which is where we do our email marketing and a system that feeds into Salesforce. So you can think of leads going in through Marketo, and all the raw data going into Redshift so that we can do different types of analyses and see what's going on. What are our KPIs? They've actually been relatively basic. We obviously track registrations, which is students signing up for Redis University. We track enrollments, which is students enrolling in a given course run. We track graduation rate. We want as many students as possible to graduate, and the graduates are kind of a function of all the previous three. So if we dig down a little bit into graduation rate, what does that look like? My understanding is that completion rates for online courses are range from anywhere from 5 to 15%, and Redis University effectively follows this trend. So you can see on the right-hand side here, here's some actual data from one of our courses just over a year ago, and you can see that the first week we get lots of engagement, over 30% in some cases, and then by the end we're down closer to that 15 to 18% range. So if you want to increase completion, what do? Well, one of them is you can run shorter courses, right? Our courses, and this gets an interesting question about whether you run your courses as instructor-paced, where new materials released each week on a schedule, or whether you run them as self-paced, where students can access the entire course. But either way, there's certainly a correlation between the length of a course and the number of students who graduate. The longer the course, the fewer students will graduate. It's really important to nudge your students, to have a way of reminding them, hey, we saw that you started the course, but you haven't finished it yet. So reminding people to finish their courses is super important. And of course, creating engaging content is important as well. And that's a whole art unto itself. How do we measure ROI? Well, there are easy ways to measure ROI, or relatively easy ways to measure ROI, and there are much more difficult ways to measure ROI. So let me talk about some of these. An easy to measure ROI is marketing qualified leads. They're really just graduates, right? If you look at this as a kind of funnel, we have our total audience, we have people who actually register, we have people who enroll, we have people who start week 1, we have people who complete some number of weeks, and we have people who actually graduate, right? And this is kind of a way to segment the population and then and deliver a real valuable potential marketing qualified lead to marketing. Certificates posted. So we think it's important for people to say, hey, I graduated from the Redis security course, or I graduated from the JavaScript course. People post these to LinkedIn. People love posting the certificates to LinkedIn. We can go into LinkedIn and actually track the posting of these certificates. LinkedIn actually doesn't give you a really easy way to do this. So the best thing I've seen so far is to actually make sure you have a relatively unique identifier for your course name, such as RU102JS, because if you search that in Recruiter, not in standard LinkedIn, but I think it's not so easy to find in standard LinkedIn, but if you have access to LinkedIn Recruiter, you can search for this as a keyword, and you can generally get pretty accurate counts on how many people have actually posted these. Certifications, obviously, this is kind of a next level, right? Because it's a small percentage of students who actually get certified compared to the number of students who graduate from our courses. We use a platform called Accredible to issue certifications, just because a certification is something people are paying a lot for, and we want to make sure that we give them the premium certificate experience. So we actually use another provider for that. But we get a sense of, okay, how many Redis certified developers exist in the world? Where is the demand for certification? Can we ascribe a dollar value to such a developer? You can model this, certainly, but again, it's an easy thing to measure because we control the whole process. Now, it's theoretically measured. Now we get into the theoretically measurable, right? Actual sales. Does Redis University result in actual sales? Well, yeah. If we go through the easy path, right? If Redis University creates a marketing qualified lead, and that turns into a sales qualified lead, and there's a sale, and Redis University is the first thing that customer touched, then yeah, Redis University got a sale, and that's easy to see. But of course, Redis University is really just one component of a more circuitous path to a sale. Right? Somebody downloads a white paper, somebody speaks with one of our solutions architects, maybe somebody takes a Redis U course, maybe then they sign up for Redis Cloud, right? And the role that Redis U played in that whole interaction is hard to quantify. And I'll be honest, maybe some organizations have been able to perfect this. We don't quite have the science of this down. Now, what's hard to measure ROI? Well, sales collateral. One of the reasons you offer instructor-paced courses on a schedule is so that you can also offer the benefit of a free self-paced online course to your prospects. So this is great for enabling engineering teams. This is great for an SDR who's talking to somebody and they're not interested in buying our product right now, but maybe they're interested in taking a free Redis University course. It's hard to measure the actual dollar value of this, but it's something very tangible and of value that our sales team can provide to engineering teams who are among our prospects. Hard to measure ROI, employee enablement. So, we actually, Redis University is part of the technical enablement of some of our employees. And so a lot of I can tell you that almost every department in the company has as part of their onboarding document, go take a self-paced Redis University course. And a huge percentage of our employees take these courses. We get great feedback on them. It's an easy way to get people on board on what the product is all about. And so this is kind of, again, a crossover benefit of having an education team and having these types of online courses. Of course, hard to measure ROI is educating the market. What is the value of one educated developer, not just a month from now, but a year from now, a decade from now? One thing we do know is that developers use the tools they know. And so, this gets to something we understand about our industry and really just a philosophical value, right? And that we believe that, the more people who are educated, the more people who know how to use our products, the more successful we'll be. Okay. I guess I've been talking really fast because I'm already very close to the end of this presentation. So hopefully there's some questions. 3 successful tips. Number 1, or 3 tips, 3 helpful tips. Number 1, you don't actually need to spend a fortune on creating a video studio. Our initial studio was just a $125 green screen and a relatively inexpensive camera. It was a semi-professional camera, but I think $2,500 were spent on the initial studio. One of the interesting things that happened since then is COVID, of course, and so we didn't have access to the studio, and people had to start recording videos at home. And we figured out, what is the minimum viable kit, right? And it actually turns out to be a tripod that can hold your phone with a light, the thing you see on the left here, a lav mic that you can record into a recorder. I strongly recommend a lav mic because it avoids a lot of extraneous noise. And having a little recorder like the Zoom recorder here, it's just really much easier to work with than recording into your smartphone or into your computer. And finally, a lot of phones can record now in 4K. So actually you get relatively high quality video that's very usable by a video editor. Now, it's not nearly as crisp or as beautiful as something that you would get from spending $1,000 on a camera. Justin, who you saw earlier, recording with his cool backgrounds and sets, he bought about a $1,000 camera, and his stuff looks super crisp and great. So you can also go there. But building a studio is not expensive, and if you go with this minimum viable studio thing at home, a lot of it is just about your own creativity. Getting the right things in the background, getting the right lighting. Doing a lot of experiment. It does take a lot of experimentation, but you can actually have a great result without spending a ton of money on this. It is useful to have a video editor. I don't recommend having the educators edit the videos themselves. So that would be your highest cost. Another thing is just, when you're building these courses, it's a production process. It's super important to review early and often and get things right early, because when things are wrong late, it's really hard to make changes, right? By the time you've produced a video, you've already spent a lot of time filming, you've spent a lot of time editing, providing feedback. If something is fundamentally wrong, it's really hard to go back and fix that, right? So it's really, this is true for a lot of things, but it's really true for education and building these types of courses, especially when they include video. Getting things right and making sure that the technical review is done, that things are said the way you want to send them, that you get a lot of review. It's really important to get that done as early on as possible before you go down the script writing phase, which is more expensive, and the filming phase, which is even more expensive from a time perspective, and the editing phase. Okay, so my final tip, and I think this may be something that's overlooked. There's a kind of an interesting anecdote here at Redis Labs, which is that when Alvin started and he created the first course, he said, look, I'm just going to do an intro course. And everybody at the company said, no, don't do an intro course. Everybody already knows Redis. Everybody already knows those basic things. And he said, no, I'm doing an intro course. And so this is a real life chart from our metrics, right? And this is interestingly, this is really consistent, right? If you look at the top line, that's the growth in signups of our intro course over the period of a month, right? And the bottom lines here are the growth in signups for all of our other courses. I think this is fascinating that the intro course is by far the most popular course, that it has a certain level of growth that's very linear, and that the other courses all have effectively the same level of growth that is also very linear. So what we've learned is that sticking with the basics, this may sound obvious, but sticking with the very basics will give you the biggest possible audience, and certainly the biggest bang on your investment. So anyway, that's I guess I spoke really quickly, but that is all I have. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Kyle. That was a powerhouse of a presentation. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sure Nate and I have questions. I don't see anything from the audience yet, but folks, please feel free if you've got. Here's one in chat. Let's see what I got here. So thank you. Very informative. Great. Thank you very much. So
actually, Harry, somebody has a question right here. How are you assessing the code exercises in your courses?
Oh, there it is. Great.
Great question. We actually aren't assessing them. Certainly building an assessing framework for code exercises would be a ton of work. I don't know how much value we necessarily bring. So what we do is we do a lot of that through multiple choice. We'll give people a code example. We'll ask them how to complete the code example. But we really, there's this thing that I learned. I went to the edX conference a couple years ago, and I was listening to the folks from the Linux Foundation who put on a Linux course, and I asked them the same question: How do you assess? And their answer is basically, we don't really assess. If people want to learn it, they'll actually go through and learn it, and they'll reach out and get help from us. And so one of the things we did do recently is that we opened up a Discord channel so that we could interact with our students in real time. So anybody who signs up for the course can get into the Discord channel and talk to us about the programming challenges. So really, people will raise questions about them and ask how do I do this, or what am I doing wrong, or they'll show a code example, and we'll actually go in there and help them with it. And so that has turned out to be a thing that's tractable. And so I guess what that tells me is that people are interested in doing the work, despite the fact that we don't have some automated method of assessing them. And when people need help, they will reach out, and they get the benefit of a personal interaction when they do that. Not sure if that's helpful, but hopefully. Does your sales team actively reach out to people who have finished a course? So MQL is a marketing qualified lead. So that really means that qualifies somebody for a certain type of marketing nurture campaign, right? It's not quite about sales yet. As far as actively, if you mean like personally, no, I would say people aren't personally reaching out, but they're going into various different campaigns and promotions and those types of activities that marketing does.
Well, I got some questions.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. That was a great presentation. So you've been at this for a while. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently if you were to do it over again?
That's a really interesting question. One of the things is that course production takes a long time, right? So maybe I would do slightly shorter courses. Our courses are 4 or even 5 weeks in length sometimes. The longer the course, the longer it takes to produce, the longer it takes the students to get through it. I think really thinking about what's going to draw the greatest number of students and really get them through having learned something without kind of demotivating them.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many things, but that's one thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. I'm curious, on your slide with the drop-off rates at each week, what do you attribute the improved retention in 2019 compared to 2018? You mentioned a few things like shorter courses, but are there other factors that you learned could actually help
honestly
that completion rate?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I know, I think getting better about nurturing has improved completion rates to some degree, but I will tell you that it's really a hard thing to measure, and I don't have great answers for what improve, especially a marginal improvement. If it's a 2 to 3% improvement in completion rate, that's extremely hard to measure, right? What we do know is that if we don't nudge people, if we don't remind people, completion rates go way down. So we know that engaging with people is super important. One thing that's been great is having this Discord channel that we use to talk to our students. That's actually been huge, just because it gets the one-on-one interaction, and that has that. I would say that's allowed us to maintain completion rates. One of the interesting things that happened during COVID is that we got a ton of signups. We got way more signups than we ever gotten before when COVID started, but completion rates went down. And we think the reason they must have gone down is because, look, a lot of people are like, hey, it's COVID. I can sign up for a whole bunch of, I'm going to go sign up for a whole bunch of courses, learn a bunch of things, right? Well, of course, maybe you're not going to get as serious of a student in that scenario, right? So you have to think about, what a sign up means, how serious is this sign up? But I will say that the personal engagement always helps.
Yeah. You mentioned nurturing. Can you talk about your infamous homework email reminders that you send out every week?
Yeah, sure. We just with the instructor-paced courses, we release new material each week, and so a couple days before the homework is due, we send a reminder email that says, hey, don't forget to finish your homework. Which is kind of Alvin's idea, and it's like that kind of call back to school, right? But it's don't forget to finish your homework because you can't submit it after Tuesday. And we think that's worked well. We think that's motivated people to come in and just, and it's not hard, right? We don't require them to, do a million multiple choice questions, right? It's just 5 well-written multiple choice questions. And in evaluating students with multiple choice questions, right? The goal is not to trick them or to see how smart they are, right? The goal is just to reinforce what they've already learned. That's a really important point, when it comes to evaluation in this context, right? If you're teaching a college class, yes, the goal is to absolutely measure competency, right? But in a class like this, which I'm opening up to the whole world and anybody can join, my goal in evaluation is just to give people basic feedback about their own performance, to give them an incentive to, or to put a little bit of roadblock to actually getting the certificate at the end, and to really, again, to reinforce what they've learned. So we're not out to trick them, we're not out to, have them prove to us how smart they are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned COVID. How has COVID affected your ability to reach developers and more technical audience? And does that provide an opportunity to conduct more events online, leveraging the Redis University site?
So we haven't conducted a ton of events online, well, with Redis University, right? I would say, COVID has, what is it? There have been so many changes with COVID, but with respect to Redis University, I would just say, again, there's been a big surge in enrollments, so we're seeing a lot more interest in it at the very least. But I would also say, that when you get those big surges of interest, that doesn't necessarily translate into higher graduation rates. So I think that, there's been the interesting case of COVID where people there's so much uncertainty, right? There was so much uncertainty at the beginning, month by month, right? That maybe people thought that the world would be fundamentally different. And so they signed up for all these courses and they didn't take them as a result. I can only speculate. I will say that it's still been important for delivering education to, to people internally, to our developers externally, et cetera. I don't think our strategy has fundamentally changed, I guess is my answer there.
Okay, it looks like we have a question that came in from John.
Yeah, thanks. I see the question, John.
Okay.
Arrangement or relationship with subject matter experts. Yeah, so some of the courses we've done with subject matter experts, and then some of the courses we've done just with, the education team itself is effectively a subject matter expert. What's the relationship? We've generally managed to get buy-in from that department. So we had a subject matter expert work with us on a Redis Streams course, and so he saw the success of Redis University, the initial course, and was like, yeah, I'm willing to do this, right? Similarly, we had a subject matter expert who was a developer advocate who came in. This is before developer advocacy was part of education, who came in and helped us with the Redis Search course. So I guess and we had another one. We had a product manager for security who helps us with the security course. So what I'll say, and I think this is the really important thing, is if the, subject matter experts are great, but if the subject matter expert doesn't have a lot of background in education, or doesn't necessarily have the writing skills, then they're going to need a lot of help in structuring the content appropriately, in writing the scripts. And it was actually a real surprise to me as to how much assistance was actually required to get it to what you would consider a professional level. And so what I recommend is really, I really think the education expert, or whoever that is, really has to gain an understanding of the material themselves in order to help. So they have to use the subject matter expert. I've heard somebody describe it this way. I think it's really, really useful. The educator, and this is also true for like somebody who writes documentation, has to act as a kind of an investigative journalist, right? And get in there and really, really ask the hard questions. What about this? What about that? Well, because what the subject matter experts tend to do is they assume a lot, right? Because they're so knowledgeable, they assume that everybody else has the same context that they have, right? And what the educators often end up going and doing and saying, yeah, but you haven't defined this term. Well, what does this mean? And and so you have to give me a definition, right? You can't just assume that I know this, right? Right. Or maybe the subject matter expert will get off into the weeds into something that they're really interested in, but that's not really the most relevant thing to a new learner. So, what I think a good educator in this context is technical enough to understand the material that's going to be taught ultimately, right? And can really think of the material from the perspective of a beginner. Like what am I going to understand by default? What am I not going to understand by default? And it can help really help the subject matter expert structure the way they want to teach this thing.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to put in your beginner's mind hat and pretend like you don't know anything and you're starting completely from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's been a really interesting process, and we're still learning the ideal way to do it, but hopefully that's helpful. And
you mentioned Andrew as someone who's been working on the courses, who's both technically accomplished but also has this pedagogical bent. Where would you recommend to someone who's trying to build an education team from scratch to find these people? Are these bloggers? Are they former tech writers? Are they, you mentioned product managers? Like what's a good profile of someone?
So I can tell you, the types of people who are on our team, maybe, because that's what I have the most experience with, right? So one of the guys who's on our team, he was a computer science guy, did some engineering work, and then went and worked for General Assembly, which is a code school. So that was just an obvious, obvious type. He has the interest, right? He has the interest in doing this sort of thing. Another guy, Simon, has done a ton of blogging on his own, attends a lot of meetups, likes to give talks, right? The thing is, I think, this education thing is so relatively niche that a lot of the people who are out there doing this kind of stuff on the side because they're passionate about it don't necessarily know about the opportunities. And so hopefully you can attract them, hopefully they can come in through the front door. But I think if you're going to go out, or if you're going to evaluate people who are coming in, I think it's essential to find people who, or at least in my experience, who have done this on their own because they're passionate about it, right? They don't necessarily have to have a degree in education. They don't have to have been a teacher necessarily. Although I would say it's good to have it would be good to have at least one person on the team who's done some real actual teaching, and who has some background in educational theory, and who can be so to speak subject matter expert on education for the team. But developer advocates, are obviously that type of person. Tech writers might be that type of person, right? I don't know. Those are some thoughts.
Cool. You mentioned earlier, like how you use badging and certificates to incentivize people to finish the courses. What role would you say does badging and certification play in motivating learners and also promoting the Redis Labs brand? Are there any other benefits you can cite?
No, like I said, we keep track of the badges, and we use that as a metric, it's just one of our potential performance indicators. Like, are people posting their badges? We view this as good for the technology, and I think any technology company would view that as good if we can go to point to LinkedIn and say, hey, people are advertising this as one of their skills, and they actually have a badge to prove it. When it comes to developers, I think there are different types of people. There are kind of those two different types of people, right? Like those who are really into like the certification and badging sort of thing, right? There's also a whole other demographic that isn't interested in that at all, right? So I think it's important for a lot of developers. It can serve as the basis of a performance indicator. It can certainly help further the brand, but at the same time, it shouldn't be overemphasized because not everybody's actually into badging. You have to know your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what advice would you give to a company that doesn't have an education team and they're trying to justify the investment to management? Can you give some like sort of ballpark figures of what type of investment they're looking at?
Yeah, well,
as far as like
I would say it depends. It depends on one of the things it depends on is whether you want to do video or not. Because if you want to do video, then you have to budget for video resources, right? And that could be, you could just start with like a subcontractor, right? And those people charge like, between $75 and $125 an hour, right? So, and it's a lot of hours of work though. And I think and if you're really serious about it, at least for us, it's worked really well to have people on staff. So, what is a salary for a video editor? Well, it's not as expensive as a software engineer, right? Whereas a subject matter expert software engineer who has teaching abilities, right? That's more like a software engineering salary, right? But what do you need to start it? If you're like us, you need one person to kind of run it and get things going, to jumpstart it. Somebody who's fairly capable, like Alvin was, for instance. And you need a video editor, right? Now, how do you justify it? That's also an interesting question. And I think that it involves conversation. It involves knowing who your audience is, right? Conversations with marketing and how the interface with marketing will look, and how you'll interface with product and engineering, and what the potential benefit. You need to have some idea of what the potential benefit might be, right? If you go back to the beginning of my presentation, it's sort of a philosophical thing for me as much as anything, which is that education potentially provides a function that the business doesn't already have or provide, right? Which is that it provides that sincere gift to people who want to learn without expecting them, without selling to them, right? I mean, and obviously I know we're harvesting some of their information, yes, right? But hopefully there's not an overt sale, right, to it, and the people that are running it are not working for marketing, they're not working for sales, right? They're subject matter experts, or they're practitioners just like you, right? Who are passionate about this technology and want to share it with the world.
And I think that sentiment is very common in the open source communities, right? Like, you're giving away the software, so why not also give away the education? But what can proprietary software companies learn from open source companies who are giving away education just like they're giving away their software?
That's an interesting question. One of the things we think about sometimes, I don't know how to directly answer that question, but maybe this indirectly answers it. One of the things we think about sometimes with respect to education is what value are we giving to the students that isn't just about selling the product, so to speak, or enabling the product, right? So I'll give an example of that. I'll give a really quick example of that. In our security course, we structured the security course so that it's not just about Redis security, right? We structured the security course to just teach people about general security principles. So that there's something actually widely applicable that a student can take away from that course that's not just about Redis Labs products. And so I think that may be one interesting way for any company to think about education is, can I provide something of value, to the student that isn't just talking about my product?
It makes total sense.
And I will leave it at that.
All right, I think we are just out of time, but Kyle, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. It's really fascinating to hear about the Redis University journey and your role at Redis Labs. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone who stuck around to the end.
Kyle, Harry, do you want to just throw up the last? I think we got one more slide just announcing a couple things.
Yeah, so we've got, if you need more information, please, you can visit redislabs.com. You can go to appsembler.com. There's a link to a replay from last month's webinar with Chef this is all going to be in the slides the deck that we'll send out to you shortly. So thanks again, Kyle. Thanks, Nate. This was terrific. Thanks for everybody for joining us as well. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.